Hello everyone, welcome to Election Future. The 2024 election has already begun, with over 50 million votes cast, and there's still 1 week remaining until Election Day. The early voting numbers are looking strong for the Republicans. Trump is significantly leading Kamala Harris in early votes. Now, you might see that Democrats are at 42%, while Republicans are at 40%. However, it's important to consider that independent voters, those who do not affiliate with either party in terms of registration, make up 18% of the electorate and tend to favor Trump over Harris. Compared to 2020, this is where we observe the most significant shift. 4 years ago, the early voting numbers showed Democrats at 45% and Republicans at only 30%, with the GOP falling behind substantially. This time, it's nearly a tie, signaling that Trump may indeed be on track for a strong electoral college victory. In this video, we'll be reviewing the 2024 electoral map based on this year's early voting data and comparing it to what we saw in 2020. To start, we'll fill in Missouri, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama, 4 states without early voting data, but almost certainly set to go for Trump by a solid margin, as they have in the last 2 election cycles. We'll also fill in the remaining safe states for both candidates, as these races aren't expected to be competitive and won't significantly impact the election outcome. For Trump, these states include Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, along with North and South Dakota, all of Nebraska except its 2nd district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, Indiana, West Virginia, South Carolina, and Alaska. Kamala Harris will carry Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. In Maine, the 1st district is solidly blue, while the 2nd is solidly red. Now, we're left with the 17 most competitive states on the map. While they account for less than half of the electoral college votes, these states hold the majority of the decision-making power in electing the next president. Let's begin in the West with Nevada, where Democrats are facing significant challenges. 4 years ago, Democrats led in early voting by 4 points, 39% to 35% over Republicans. This year, the numbers have flipped, with Republicans at 40% and Democrats at 35%, shifting Nevada from a Democrat +4 to a Republican +5. Nevada is now likely to lean Republican, with Trump expected to flip the state. Democrats haven't seen substantial gains in Nevada since the early Obama era, and the state has been trending rightward, especially since 2022. When they elected a Republican governor, ousting the incumbent Democrat. In neighboring Arizona, the outlook for the vice president is no better. 4 years ago, Joe Biden trailed by just 3% in early voting, Democrats at 35% and Republicans at 38%. Despite this, Biden managed to win Arizona by a narrow 0.3%, becoming the first Democrat to carry it since 1996. However, in 2024, Republicans have widened their lead to 42%. While Democrats are at just 35%. Additionally, Republicans typically show stronger turnout in person on Election Day, which will likely give the GOP an additional boost on November 5th. With Democrats already behind by 7 points in early voting, it will be challenging for them to catch up. Consequently, Arizona is also expected to lean Republican. As we move on to Colorado and New Mexico, things continue to look difficult for Kamala Harris. 4 years ago, Democrats led by 2 points. This time, they're up by 3. While this might seem positive for Harris, a closer look at the age breakdown reveals potential trouble ahead. The 65 and older demographic. The 65 and over group is the most important age-based voting bloc, as they consistently show higher turnout than younger voters and tend to favor the GOP heavily. Looking at early voting numbers from 2020 in Colorado, 23% of voters were 65 and older. Today, that number has jumped to 45%. This shift represents a significant advantage for Republicans. And if this trend continues, Colorado could become one of the most competitive races in the country. Harris is unlikely to maintain Biden's 14-point margin from 2020. Instead, Colorado is expected to lean blue on our map. In New Mexico, we're seeing a similar pattern. Democrats held 49% in 2020, and they are at 49% again this year. However, analyzing the data by age reveals a critical trend. The 65 and over group now comprises a majority of early voters, which benefits Republicans. In 2020, this age group made up only 42% of the early voting electorate. Thus, New Mexico also becomes more competitive, leaning toward the Democrats, but tilting blue on this map. Moving down to Texas, Republicans are in a strong position. They held 53% of early votes in 2020, and are at 52% now. Although this seems like a small decrease, a closer look at age demographics shows that the 65 and over group is now at 36%, up from 26% in 2020. This trend highlights a challenge for Harris, who has focused on courting younger voters, but they are not turning out in the numbers needed. In 2020, 14% of early voters were between 18 to 29, compared to just 9% now. Since younger voters typically lean Democratic, low turnout among this group makes it difficult for Democrats to win. As a result, Texas is expected to go solidly red, with Trump winning the state by his largest margin yet. Next, let's examine Georgia to complete the Sun Belt before moving to the Midwest. In 2020, early voting in Georgia favored Republicans by 8%. Today, they hold a 4% lead. While this is a slight reduction, it's essential to understand the distinction between mail-in ballots and in-person early ballots. In-person early voting can take place in the days and weeks leading up to Election Day, whereas mail-in ballots can be submitted as early as 2 months prior. Republicans generally prefer early in-person voting over mail-in voting, which means GOP numbers are likely to increase as more people vote in person as Election Day approaches. So far, the majority of votes cast in Georgia have been via mail-in ballots, which tend to favor Democrats. Consequently, Georgia is expected to lean red on our map. Now, if you want to see a major shift, look no further than Florida. The transformation here is remarkable. Republicans have turned Florida from one of the nation's most competitive states to one of the least. In 2020, early voting was nearly tied, with Democrats at 39% and Republicans at 38%. Today, with 5.1 million early votes cast, Republicans have taken a decisive lead. This time, Republicans are at 45%, while Democrats are down to 34%. So Florida is likely to be a Republican win on the map. It's entirely possible that Trump could win the state by a double-digit margin. Before we continue, I want to introduce you to Polymarket, the world's largest prediction market, where you can track election results in real time and see who's leading. Unlike polls, which can take days to respond to events, these odds update instantly and avoid any bias or media spin, relying on the collective analysis, beliefs, and insights of thousands of traders reacting to world events. Polymarket recently launched a mobile app where you can access their 2024 election forecast on the go, and it's what I use daily to stay updated on the presidential race. You can download it for free using the QR code on the screen or the link in the description below. Returning to the map, let's shift our focus to North Carolina, another state where early voting has shifted from favoring Democrats to Republicans. In 2020, Democrats led by 5 points, with 37% compared to Republicans' 32%. Today, Republicans have completely turned the tables and now lead by 1%, with the GOP at 34% and Democrats at 33%. As more early in-person votes are cast each day, Republicans are likely to expand their lead. North Carolina serves as a prime example of a state moving leftward, yet Democrats have struggled to secure it, despite investing hundreds of millions over the past decade. Even in 2020, when Biden led in early voting and was ahead in polls, he still lost by 1.3%. Given Trump's current lead in early voting numbers, North Carolina is expected to lean Republican. Finishing up the South with Virginia, Democrats led early voting by 8% in 2020 and now lead by 14%. However, keep in mind that many early in-person votes are yet to be counted, which will likely bolster Republican numbers. Additionally, age demographics are in Republicans' favor, with 45% of ballots coming from older voters, up from 32% in 2020. Youth voter turnout has also decreased, from 16% for Biden to just 8% for Harris. Virginia is shaping up to be a competitive state, even though Biden won it by double digits in 2020. It's likely to tilt blue on this map. Moving up to the Midwest, Kamala Harris's entire campaign depends on her ability to win Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Losing even one of these 4 states would be disastrous for her. We'll start with Minnesota, where Harris currently leads by 23 points in early voting, a substantial increase from Biden's 13-point lead 4 years ago. However, a surge in independent voters, especially among the 65 and over age group, could benefit Trump. It's also essential to distinguish between mail-in ballots, which can be submitted at any time, and early in-person ballots, which have limited availability. The bulk of these early votes are mail-in ballots, heavily favoring Democrats. Given these factors, Minnesota is expected to lean blue, though Harris is likely to underperform Biden's 7-point win from 2020. Down in Iowa, Democrats had a substantial 12-point lead in early voting in 2020, though Biden ultimately lost the state by 8 points. This year, Democrats face even bigger challenges, with early votes nearly tied by party registration, 42% for Democrats and 39% for Republicans. Given these numbers, Trump is expected to win Iowa comfortably, marking his strongest performance in the state yet, which he originally flipped in 2016. He maintained his hold on Iowa in 2020 by virtually the same margin, even though Biden was expected to perform much better than Hillary Clinton. With early votes nearly tied, Iowa is projected to be solidly red. In Nebraska's 2nd district, while we lack specific data, it's likely to lean blue. Turning to Wisconsin, Democrats held 35% in 2020, rising only slightly to 36% this year. There's a larger group of unaffiliated voters who heavily favor Trump, and a significant portion of remaining early in-person votes expected to benefit Republicans. Notably, half of the ballots cast so far are from voters 65 and older, compared to 34% in 2020. Another positive sign for Republicans. This trend spells trouble for Harris, as she must hold Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Trump is likely to win Wisconsin, where he previously won by 0.7% in 2016, potentially increasing that margin to over 2% this cycle. In Michigan, the most liberal of the 7 swing states, Harris's campaign hinges on winning. If she can capture any battleground state, it would be Michigan. Recently, Fox News moved Michigan from lean Democrat to toss-up status and shifted Arizona to lean Trump. This reflects Trump's growing momentum. In 2020, Democrats trailed by 2 points in early voting. Now they lead by 7, an even smaller margin than in Wisconsin. A breakdown by age shows that 53% of Michigan's early voters are 65 and older, with just 8% in the 18-29 range, compared to 13% in 2020. If Harris loses Michigan, she's on track for a landslide defeat, with Trump potentially winning all swing states and possibly more. Democrats' slight early leads in some swing states fall short of what they need, which has fueled concern within the party. Michigan, therefore, is projected as lean Republican. In Ohio, early voting trends mirror those of Iowa. In 2020, Republicans led 48% to 38%. This year, they hold a 49% to 42% lead. With 2 million votes already cast, Ohio, a state that often mirrors Iowa, remains likely red, though Trump's margin may be somewhat smaller than in Iowa. Finally, in Pennsylvania, the numbers are crucial for both campaigns. Winning Pennsylvania would make it much easier for Trump, as it would mean he only needs North Carolina and Georgia, without requiring Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, or Arizona. Early voting in Pennsylvania shows improvement for Republicans since 2020. When Democrats led 65% to 24%, now it stands at 59% Democrat to 31% Republican. With another week of in-person early voting to go, Republicans are well positioned. It's doubtful that Harris can win Pennsylvania, especially given her choice of Tim Walz as a running mate, who performed poorly in debates against J.D. Vance. Consequently, Pennsylvania is expected to lean red, putting all 7 battleground states clearly in favor of Trump. To wrap up the map, let's look at the Northeast, specifically New Hampshire and Maine. In 2020, New Hampshire's early votes were 50% Democrat to 21% Republican, more than a 2-to-1 ratio. Now, Democrats are at just 39% to Republicans 33%, making New Hampshire a near toss-up. Trump nearly won here in 2016, losing by only half a percentage point, so New Hampshire is expected to tilt blue. In Maine, the shift is less pronounced, though Republicans have improved from 24% to 27%, while Democrats have dropped from 48% to 44%. Maine is projected to lean blue for Harris. With over a quarter of expected votes already cast, Democrats hold 42% compared to Republicans' 40%, a favorable trend for the GOP, given that Democrats led by 15% at this stage in 2020. The historical gap between Democrats' early votes and Republicans' Election Day turnout is narrowing, as more Republicans vote early and more Democrats wait until Election Day. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this leading up to the election in November.